Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the output gap and Okun's law. All right, so we'll start by talking about potential GDP. So first of all, what is potential GDP? Well, it's a level of real GDP attained when firms are producing at capacity and labor is fully unemployed. Business cycles. Why do they occur? Well, the reason why cycles occur is due to shocks, which cause real GDP to diverge from the potential GDP. An example of this would be a positive shock, which would cause GDP to rise above potential GDP. This would cause people to experience higher incomes and for businesses to experience increasing sales and productions. And we're going to discuss this as well as potential GDP and real GDP later. So on that topic, let's talk about potential GDP and real GDP. Well, GDP can be thought of as being two things, potential GDP and the difference between actual GDP and potential GDP. And that can be expressed in this formula here, where we have the actual real GDP, and that will be equal to potential plus the difference between actual and potential. So let's talk about GDP and the output gap. Well, first of all, what is an output gap? An output gap is the percent deviation of real GDP from potential GDP. The formula for the output gap is as follows. Output gap can be expressed as the difference between actual less potential over potential. But what does this mean? Well, if the output gap is negative, this means that the economy is below its potential. If the output gap is positive, this means that the economy is above its potential. And if the output gap is zero, then the economy is producing at its potential. So business cycles, why are they important? Why should we care about them? Well, the main reason why is because of costs. Business cycles cause volatility and uncertainty, which have inherent costs. What costs are associated with the volatility and uncertainty in the economy? Well, the number one would be inflation. And this happens when GDP is greater than potential GDP. And the second one would be lost wages and income when GDP is less than potential GDP. So let's talk about unemployment, particularly natural and cyclical unemployment rates. So what is a natural unemployment rate? The natural unemployment rate is the normal unemployment rate that occurs when the economy is producing at potential GDP. What is a cyclical unemployment rate? The cyclical unemployment rate is the difference between the actual unemployment rate and the natural unemployment rate. And that can be expressed here in this formula, where we have the actual unemployment less the natural unemployment, and that would be equal to your cyclical. So to bridge these two concepts that we've learned so far, we're going to learn about Okun's law. And this is the relationship between cyclical unemployment and the output gap. And this can be expressed by the following equation. We have that the equation we already learned about, where we have actual unemployment less the natural unemployment. And then that'll be equal to what we call Okun's law coefficient. And then you have your output gap right here. And so if the output gap is positive, then the actual unemployment rate is lower than the natural rate. And if the output gap is negative, then the actual unemployment rate is higher than the natural rate. So Okun's law coefficient will illustrate an effect on the cyclical unemployment rate from a 1% change in the output gap. That coefficient is less than 1, meaning unemployment varies less than unemployment. And this is because it is costly to hire and fire workers. And for this class, we're going to assume that 0.5 is the Okun's law coefficient. And we can use that in the example that we'll talk about at the end here. So let's talk about the costs of recessions and booms, also known as expansion. The main three costs of recessions would be as follows. Recessions can often be longer and more severe than booms. When workers are unemployed for long periods of time, their skills and education can become obsolete. And the third one would be the recessions impact low-income workers the most. And we kind of saw this with the COVID-19 pandemic that happened within the last year or so. What are the costs of booms? Well, when GDP is greater than potential GDP, the economy starts to overheat. And that can mean that businesses will find it hard to find workers, land, and machinery, which will mean that prices of inputs will rise. And this can cause the prices of goods and services to rise as well, which will lead to inflation. All right, let's do an example here. Assume that in 2010, the unemployment rate in Canada was 9.5%. If the natural rate of unemployment is assumed to be 6.5%, what is the output gap? And once again, use 0.5 for Okun's law coefficient. All right, let's talk about the answer. Remember, we need to use the following formula. So when we input the numbers in the formula, we get 9.5% less 6.5%, which was the natural, would be equal to the coefficient times your gap. And now we just need to solve for the gap. So as you rearrange, you'll get a 3% divided by the coefficient. And that's going to be that right there, the 0.5, and then you'll have a negative 6%. So the output gap is negative 6%. All right, for citations, these are the two sources I used. Thanks so much for your time.